for every batch of birds that we bring in, we test them for any antibiotic residue in meat. Not just because we don't want to have them receive antibiotics, but that does in some fashion and form deposit into the meat. And then when you consume it, you will be exposed to that. And if consumers are buying something that says antibiotic-free, it damn sure better be antibiotic-free. And so that's our standard.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Benair. Today I'm joined by Robby Sansom, co-founder and CEO of Force of Nature. In this episode, we talk about regenerative farming and ethical meat production. Robby shares how his team is redefining agriculture with nutrient-dense food and radical transparency. Plus, we discuss the real cost of cheap food, reshaping consumer habits, and building a values-driven supply chain. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider Podcast is presented by EGYM. EGYM's smart fitness ecosystem is transforming healthcare through exercise, combining strength equipment with AI-powered software and corporate wellness platform WellPass. It's leading the shift to proactive preventative health. Learn more about EGYM's intelligent workout solutions at egym.com. Hi, Robby. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Excited about the conversation today. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we can get into, but from the top, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us about Force of Nature?
Yeah, my name's Robby Sansom. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Force of Nature. We're a meat purveyor. We sell meat, and we do that direct to consumer. We do it in the grocery store. We do it in a variety of restaurant chains or in collaborations with some other brands that folks may be familiar with. But what makes us unique is that we are bringing forward and offering the most superior meat in the market. I think folks would probably be familiar with some of the commonly recited objections to the meat agriculture system, and what I would consider to be the industrial agriculture system, whether it's environmental or welfare or health issues. And I think we have a company that is overcoming all of those challenges and over delivering on consumer expectations. So bringing forward proteins across a variety of animal species that have the highest standards for not just mitigating negative impacts, but bringing forward positive solutions and impact, whether it be environmental or ecosystem impacts, whether it be on the lifestyle and life cycle and welfare of animals in those systems, or the people stewarding those animals in those lands, or ultimately with the consumer and ensuring that they're getting a product that meets or exceeds their expectations for, again, welfare, ecosystem impact, but also quality and nutritional superiority, whether it's the density of and the nutritional profile or the absence of the common toxic soup elements of chemicals or metals or plastics or things like that. So I think we go way beyond the norm to address those issues. And then also, I think, assist consumers in better understanding the food system that they are a part and party to. And where I think we have so many well-intentioned people out there trying to do the right thing when they go to the store and they go to a restaurant and they make purchasing decisions. And I think the industry at large really lets them down, or in some cases at worst might even, be misleading them, where what they expect and what they desire is very likely significantly under delivered on by what they're ultimately purchasing. And I think that's a travesty, because I think consumers should have more transparency and more awareness to issues. And we set out to deliver just that through educational efforts and outreach and digital or social media, messaging and storytelling, really, again, trying to raise awareness to issues in food and then offer solutions. And it's not for me to tell somebody what they should or shouldn't desire. It's just for me to help them understand what the system really looks like and what their options are, and let them make the choice that best suits them, because the system on its own does not do that.
It's complicated, right? In some ways, that as a consumer, you're trying to make sense of this and make the best decision, as you say, and then operating this business. And now really, in some ways, you're second, and maybe even more than I know from your background. You were previously involved at Epic, which was known for kind of meat and snack bars, that was acquired some years ago, and now kind of continuing that effort with Force of Nature. Where, how do you even begin to have that impact in the food system in a way that it shows up for the consumer? It has that transparency. It really starts to move and move the needle towards this impact that you're talking about having.
I would say it probably starts to some extent with authenticity and passion. I think there's a lot of brands that are out there, and candidly, that's something that is unique about Force of Nature, even within this massive meat industry. We are a brand. We are seeking to engage with and form relationships and connect with consumers on a level that is atypical for a commodity, where it is what's the cheapest price and how do we compete on that a single variable, which is a large part of the reason for the degradation of the category and the trade-off of cheapness in favor of values in the food system. But I think, we're genuinely passionate about this. We've been, for a variety of reasons, down the rabbit hole in the food system, and you can't unknow once you're exposed to some of these realities, and it's on a variety of really significant issues, global issues related to carbon and the atmospheric level, but also an absence of carbon in our food production systems, which I think may be an even greater challenge. Pollinators that are requisite for healthy food systems and production and food security and stability of the future. You look at weather patterns and the status of topsoil and the status and plight of the communities of people making our food, and the absence of nutrition in our food, and the presence of harmful compounds and chemicals in our food. I mean, there's just a list I could rattle off for the next 20 minutes of these major issues that we're facing that generally all point back to agriculture. Agriculture is it's not just about the little bit of time we think about food on a from a geographic perspective. Some form of agriculture is being practiced on roughly half of the landmass of the United States, and about 1/3 of the landmass of the globe, certainly not the parts not covered in ice. And when you think of that scale, if it's being done poorly and it's spilling off or spinning off negative externalities, it's catastrophic at that scale. On the flip side, if it's having a positive impact and it's creating solutions, it's incredibly positive in its impact. And so, understanding the issues and the nuance and the how we got here and how we can navigate out of the system, or as I say, with a car racing towards a cliff, course correct. Slowing down does very little, but course correcting is necessary. It's easy to be passionate about it. And then, of course, the authenticity, I think, is also clear, right? I think there's a number of examples out there of companies that are really just, academic pursuits or algorithmic models that, simply the numbers check out. And so the business is born. And I think for us, it's sort of it's probably the opposite. We looked at what does it take to try to disrupt the meat industry, given its size and given its collaborative and complementary relationship with big agriculture, big pharmaceutical, big chemical, big petroleum, big healthcare, and then still decide against all odds to take on that challenge, understanding what it takes to found and grow and succeed with any sort of a business. We really didn't want to. We felt compelled to, and so I'd say those are a couple of the key factors in what it takes to at least get started. Now, to succeed and disrupting, probably a different set of answers. But I don't want to go too far down that path unless that's the direction you want to take the conversation.
Yeah, we often have this conversation, a similar conversation, and certainly they're connected, but with respect to the healthcare system, right? The incentives are misaligned, like kind of across the board. And these companies, you mentioned some of them, pharmaceutical and hospital and healthcare, they're not making money when people are healthy. They're making money when people are sick. And with the food system, you mentioned a couple things, the commoditization and just focusing on pricing and not having necessarily the transparency or ultimately the incentives to do things any differently. And so whether it's the things that you have identified as like the North Stars, this is how you go about disrupting this industry, or even how do you align the incentives in a way that, one, it makes your business able to work and operate in a way that, the kind of traditional meat industry hasn't, or in a way that you can start to shape that food system so that it does become easier or more affordable or even more accessible for consumers.
Yeah, well, it's a real. I'll have a real short, concise answer for you on that one. No, I'm kidding. That's there's a lot. There's a lot to that, but I do agree with part of the premise of the question that I think it has more to do with incentives than it has to do with the malicious intent of organizations. I think whether it's a governmental organization or a not-for-profit or an NGO or one of these for-profit large incumbent players, I think what you find when you walk in the doors are a bunch of well-intentioned people. And I think you also find a bunch of incentives that lead that organization astray and certainly lead it off the mark and then make it really difficult to steer the ship back on a trajectory that is creating positive outcomes for the broadest constituency of stakeholders, and a large financial and fiduciarily driven interest in maintaining the status quo when so much energy and resource and financial capital has been dedicated to profiting off of the present framing and structuring of how that system works. And so there's many ways to go about it. I think for us, I don't know politics. I'm not a lobbyist. I don't know how to affect regulation, and I know that I don't have the capital resources to force my will and to amplify our message. And I know that we've been a part of big businesses and understand how difficult it is to drive change from within. But I know that you and I are on having this conversation right now because a small under resourced group of individuals overcame the then greatest power on earth based off of an uprising and a groundswell from the front lines. And I think that's what consumers are and can be. I think that we wield as consumers the most awesome power in a capitalistic society, and that nobody will produce a product that a consumer won't buy. And in the age of information and transparency, and at a time where we've actually, for better or worse, been able to see how far off track we are, when we see the degradation of land, when we see us spending 4 times more than any other developed nation, but having far worse health outcomes in our adult populations and even worse in our children populations, when we see, all of these consequences of the present system, it's not hard to confirm in the minds of consumers that there's a challenge. Now, it may be difficult to reach them, but that's something that you can work on. But convincing them that there's issues is easy. And also convincing them to care about what it is that we're bringing to the table isn't that hard. I think they are already seeking what we are offering. And as I said earlier, are simply being underserved. They're already looking for systems that are void of massive abuse of animals unnecessarily, and they're looking for products that will be the healthiest for them and the families, their families and the people that they will feed. And they want to feel good about the impact that they're having with their purchasing choices and be in some form of values alignment with the organizations that they purchase from, and doing so support. And I think that, again, the system just lets them down. So going back to what it is we do, create awareness to issues and access to a solution. And then on the other side of the front for consumers, and on the other side of the front line with land stewards, build systems and connect them into that supply network where they'll be rewarded for elevating their practices and taking those risks and challenges. And what we're seeing is market signals being sent saying, hey, there's more and more purchasing dollars going to support the pasture raising of animals and programs that are 100% grass finished. And there's more survey data beginning to show that as we age out of the boomers driving the economy and move into Gen X and millennials driving the future of the economy, we see them indexing more towards, or favoring more solutions oriented products. Now, it still needs to be affordable and it still needs to be better for me, but I think that we're bringing the right things to the table in the right ways at the right time, so that we can send signals into the market that says, hey, look, you took it too far when you traded off all of the value of these products for something cheap. Like, this is what we feed ourselves. And in pursuing cheapness at the expense of all else, we invited many perils to our own health and the stability of our own society and the quality of the systems across a set of values that are important to us. And we no longer want to make that compromise. We're willing to pay a little bit more in order to bring back value to the food that is the cornerstone of our diet, which is the cornerstone of our well-being and ultimately our lifespan and health span, right?
Even when you think about the kind of signals and the consumer demand and how things are shifting, because I agree they are in fact moving towards, we want to invest in, and kind of what you said, like basically vote with our dollars. Like, we want the ethically sourced and humane and better for us, more nutritious. How do you tell that story in a way that it does resonate when you have kind of greenwashing to some extent with other environmental issues, or even there's been a number of kind of tests. They test meat at XYZ grocery store and it has microplastics in it, or it has some other ingredients that's not supposed to be there. So upholding that standard, the quality, telling the story, and really ensuring that passion and authenticity delivers when they get the product.
For us, it's really not about a singular claim or a singular outcome. It's about the pursuit of continuous improvement and ultimately excellence. And also, we're our own consumers. Our first core value is feed others as we wish to be fed. And we're a tad bit maniacal about what we do and eat. I think you just, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but you just gave an example, right? I think we're so far beyond where the industry was decades ago, but even still, antibiotic-free is one of the most popular claims across meats in the category. And yet, to make that claim, you need somebody to sign a piece of paper that says they didn't give the animal antibiotics, and you just hope they didn't have their fingers crossed. And most of the industry accepts those affidavits or accepts those claims, and it's all about paperwork. For us, in learning that, we're like, wait a minute, how can we be sure? So we go to the farms and we shake the farmers' hands and we walk the land and we see the animals and we understand their why. Is your why just tell me what I want to hear to sell to me? Or do you have some goal or objective and set of values that actually aligns with ours? And then there's a long list of protocol criteria that exceeds the industry. And then we do monthly check-ins and annual check-ins across an even broader array, and then measurements, and in many instances engaging with third parties for certifications. And just one example is, like, with each, we just relaunched chicken, and this is one of the most pervasive use of antibiotics, that category, or poultry. It's one of the most pervasive use of antibiotics of anything in the country. And so for every batch of birds that we bring in, we test them for any antibiotic residue in meat, not just because we don't want to have them receive antibiotics, but that does in some fashion and form deposit into the meat. And then when you consume it, you will be exposed to that. And if consumers are buying something that says antibiotic-free, it damn sure better be antibiotic-free. And so that's our standard, and it costs more, and it's more burdensome, and it creates more friction in the supply chain. But it's the right thing to do. And I think that goes back to, like, the integrity and the authenticity that I was talking about. Like, I feed this to my children and I'm not going to compromise. And I think there's a lot of companies that would like to tell that story, but they don't know how. And so I think, for what I mean by that is, if you follow us on social media, or you follow our newsletter, or you listen to podcasts that we may do, or blogs that we put out, it's not hard to pretty quickly understand that we're walking the walk in addition to talking the talk. We're talking about things other people aren't talking about, looking at things, creating awareness, trying to connect consumers to ideas, sending videos, sending pictures. Like, we are proud. We want to shout from the rooftops and show everybody what it is that we're doing that we think makes a difference. When folks aren't as driven to do the right thing no matter what, they might have the claim on the package and it stops there, or they might say something nice in the romance copy on their website and it stops there. If all they're doing is telling you what you want to hear, I would say approach that with skepticism, because the people that are legitimate are showing you, and they're probably being a little bit annoying about it because they're so eager and excited and proud to show you. And so I think that kind of ties into it. And then the last thing, rounding that out, we really distanced consumers from the food system in the last generation or so. This literally was founded as a nation of farmers, and it would have been upwards of 30% farmers in the 1900 or so times. And now we're less than 3% farmers. And so we would have had a deep and meaningful understanding and relationship of the food system. And we've lost that. And I think consumers go to the grocery store, and retailers largely compete with one another on price. And the perimeter of the store is where the commodities typically are, produce and meat. And those are the number one drivers, with one exception, price. And so the trifecta of produce, meat, and the best prices kind of drove the industry. And without any checks and balances or transparency or accountability, we kind of went off the rails and traded off too many things. And then we're at the stage, and we saw it in CPG, the center of the store. All of a sudden, new claims started showing up on the package, and new brands and new stories. And it became less about the cartoon character and the price, and a little bit more about the values and about the people, maybe even, or the communities. And so I think that is a way of connecting back to food. And again, whenever you're interacting with a company or you're exposed to a company like Force of Nature, you get to understand the people and the systems, and all of a sudden that authenticity and that the genuine, sincere human connection can happen in a capacity that hasn't historically happened in food, especially not meat or the perimeter. And then that invites you to kind of start the journey of a relationship and a little bit of trust. And then over more time and more interactions together, you start to see what we're talking about and why we're talking about. And look, for the people that really want to go down the rabbit hole, and it sounds like you've done some research, we try to be available to let folks go as far as they want to go and dig in and go deep, and we make that stuff available. But we also have to be very careful in recognizing that that's a small segment of the population, and we can't talk over people's heads. And we have to continue to also put some introductory level concepts out there that invites folks into that deeper conversation based off of where they are and what they care about. Not everybody cares about the same thing. We got a whole lot of vegan customers buying Force of Nature because it's the only things they feel proud to feed to their animals that they know should be eating meat. I would say it's pretty funny, but true. And so I'd say those are a few ways that we're trying to reach people with that messaging and bring something comfortable and familiar into an arena that, candidly, you can juxtapose that with the historical meat or the incumbents in it, and they don't really want to engage with people or foster a relationship or connection. They'd rather pull the curtains and blinders over people's eyes and keep them don't look at where it comes from. Don't ask questions. Just look at our price tag. And because that suits them well, because once you go a step or two beyond that, it's rather off-putting, and their sales would be materially negatively impacted by result of any level of transparency. And I think that's part of the point.
This episode of the Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by EGYM. EGYM makes some of the most innovative strength training machines on the market, but that's only one part of their integrated ecosystem. With connected fitness equipment, AI-powered gym software, and a comprehensive corporate wellness offering, it's forging the future of preventative health. Partnering with companies worldwide, EGYM's WellPass program improves employee health by expanding access to premier fitness and health facilities. Upgrading gym floors, EGYM equips every operator with smart equipment and AI tools to create hyper-personalized training plans for every exerciser. Putting it all together, they're transforming healthcare through exercise. Experience the power of EGYM's ecosystem at egym.com. We've talked obviously about meat, but also agriculture, and now the entire food system. And it's, in some extent, it's like pushing a boulder up a hill, right? There's like so much work to be done. There's how can we disrupt it? What does it look like to shift, not even a majority, but a larger percentage of the population to maybe taking this interest in eating in a healthier way, whatever that means to them. But certainly the things we're talking about, when you look at what's prohibiting, force of nature from continuing to make this progress, or ethically sourced or regenerative agriculture to making this progress, do you look at like these are the biggest roadblocks in the way, or these are the biggest opportunities that are in front of us? Like, how do you think about continuing to like make that headway and progress?
Yeah, it's so much opportunity. I mean, there's no doubt, sometimes it's challenging to achieve an objective, but everything we do is hard or impossible depending on how you define it. So, I don't think that anybody ever had an expectation that it would be easy, but there's so much opportunity. I mean, the status quo is so obviously riddled with error and challenge, and the consumer is so clearly frustrated and looking for answers and solutions. The biggest challenges that we probably face are, the time it takes to build and do this responsibly and make sure our ends meet and we're not getting too far over our skis and we're not taking too big of risks. And then, yeah, I mean, we have a society that has conditioned consumers to believe and think things are facts when really they're not. And it's in some ways kind of remarkable to think of how we've trained people to behave predictably against their own interests. This idea that, meat should be cheap when it's probably the most important superfood in the grocery store, and it will be the cornerstone of 3 meals a day for most people. And it comes from living sentient beings. And somehow that needs to be cheap. And we've perverted that narrative so much that now the expectation is that meat, given its importance and the nuance of the ethic behind it, should be cheaper than water, cheaper than coffee, cheaper than almonds, cheaper than candy. You don't think that because you buy a pound of meat. Even though a pound of meat is 4 servings, you can feed a family of 4, the most nutrient dense they'll probably get that week, with a $8 to $12 pound of meat. And on the high end, what Force of Nature charges is like 70 cents an ounce. Ruffles 70 cents an ounce. We're the most premium, and that is still half the cost of Ruffles potato chips on a price per ounce, or a Snickers bar on a price per ounce. And so, we just have these bizarre perspectives on and breaking that thinking and that conditioning. And then, of course, you have a farm system that falsely supports prices on the shelf that actually don't represent the true cost. There's a lot of subsidy that goes into keeping the cost of the most commodity food low at the expense of taxpayers, or on the backs of the credit of small farmers, or not to mention deferring the cost, the actual tangible costs of health compromises for the cheapness that was made in those foods, whether or not it's the fact that glyphosate, for example, is showing up in urine and breast milk and blood in the majority of people tested. In each research study that looks into that, there's a material health cost that is coming. Just because it's not shown at the shelf doesn't mean it isn't there. And the same thing for the quality of wild places and ecosystems, and the stability of those systems that are creating our food. We're losing our productivity, and every year we have to do more to try to offset the fact that we're degrading those systems. And there is legitimate concern over the stability and security of the food system based off of the damage that we cause in pursuit of this current system that favors cheapness at any expense. And so, again, not to get too far down the rabbit hole, but I think there's a number of variables like that favor us in the long run, but in the near term, there's a lot of work to do and a lot of education to do. And again, I think what specifically to me, what consumers have been trained on is it should be cheap. Look for cheapness, shop for deals, and you really see that in the data, especially with older generations. And so I think we have to peel that back. We have to show people that, hey, look, if you buy Force of Nature beef at $12 a pound, and you go buy some organic frozen vegetables, and you cook that for your family of 4, it will be half the price or less of going to Chick-fil-A or your local burger fast food restaurant or whatever thing that you perceive as cheap. And you got to get over the idea that the price at the grocery store is the sole focal point. So I think overcoming things like that. But again, I do believe we have tailwinds in those efforts. And I think we're seeing a lot of momentum and the trends favor us.
As we get towards the end of the conversation, you mentioned kind of relaunching the chicken and poultry program. As you think about whether it's introducing new products or scaling up production or continuing to check off the goals that you have for the company, is there anything that's top of mind for you that you're excited about, things that you wanted to mention maybe we should look out for, or anything in development or in the works?
Yeah, some of the products that we're most well known for are the incorporation of organ meats into some of our ground formats. So, we launched early with what we would call our Ancestral blend. We have regular ground beef, but we also have Ancestral blend ground beef where we incorporate a little bit of heart and a little bit of liver. Not enough that you taste it, but these things are packed with phytonutrients and micronutrients and minerals. And it truly, a very little bit won't affect your palate. You won't taste it, but it is a game changer when it comes to delivering what you need to live a healthy life, and what a lot of people would probably pay a heck of a lot of money for at the drugstore, or candidly, what a lot of people, even in developed nations, are deficient in. So many iron, zinc, vitamin A, calcium, B12. I mean, this stuff is packed with it. And so they've done wildly well because there's a bunch of folks that are aware of that, a heck of a lot of folks that aren't, but those products have been very successful for us. And so we've rolled out meatballs that are really awesome, that taste great, but then also have an ancestral product in that. And then pretty soon we're going to be rolling out some sausages that are incorporating that. So that's been wildly popular, and that's something that folks can expect more of. I'm really proud of the poultry, the chicken program we just rolled out. I always say people should eat a lot less chicken and pay a lot more for it. I don't think people realize that. I think chicken is like the original plant-based meat. If you look at the strategy that Beyond or Impossible employed, it was, kind of to sort of vilify red meat and to present this cheaper alternative solution as better for the environment, better for welfare, better for your health, even though it delivered on none of those attributes. And if you look at, back a generation and a half or so, go back to the 40s, we eat about 86% of the red meat or beef that we eat, and we eat about 350% of the chicken. And the main reason for that is because those smaller animals took to industrialization so much better than larger animals. I mean, they have shorter lifespans. They can be kept in a higher level of confinement where you can curate an entirely synthetic environment, whether it be the light, the air, the food, everything about the living condition to accelerate their growth. Because they have short life cycles, you can rapidly breed them to produce attributes that you like. For example, creating abnormally large breasts so you can get more chicken breast per bird, even if it comes at the expense of the development of their skeletal structure and their organ systems and their immune systems and the abs, and breeding out characteristics like the ability to procreate or to evade predation or anything that you might consider to be a true biological imperative. And so that's a lot to say that I think, in order to get a $5 rotisserie chicken that smells good at the register of whatever popular store you may go to, there's been a catastrophic degree of trade-offs made to get there. And I think that we need to reevaluate that. And so, our poultry program, these birds are living longer life. That means that from a welfare perspective, they're necessarily developing a little bit more slowly, so that they're anatomically normal and biologically normal. It also means they're imparting more nutrition into the meat. They're going to be more nutritionally dense and bring more value. There's a number of things that we're doing to ensure that where they are raised, they're having a positive impact, and that the environment that they're in is one that is definitively suited for that species of animal, and that they have outdoor, not just access, but enrichments and all sorts of things to draw them and ensure from a breed all the way to an environment perspective that they can live outside as much as it's safe for them to be outside. And then going back to the feed system, ensuring that the feed that they're getting is appropriate and that it isn't part of a system that is, guilty of the myriad of industrial challenges that modern agriculture brings forth, and that there's not chemicals in that feed that then go into the food that you eat, all the way into the breeding programs. Like a lot of folks don't realize that with poultry, They hatch a day old chicken and they figure out if it's a male or a female, and if it's the wrong gender, it goes straight off the conveyor while alive into a grinder. And so we have no sexing of chicks. There's males and females on the ground, and nothing's being killed or terminated at that first step. And the list goes on and on. So I think what it does is it makes a more expensive bird, but it makes a more historically accurate bird that, our grandparents and the generations before them would have celebrated, to the extent where a chicken in every pot was seen as a call for prosperity, versus chicken being the cheapest thing on the planet and putting chicken protein in anything, and it kind of really falling short of, I think, the expectations of the modern consumer. So in any case, there's a brief history of chicken and why our program is one that we're really, and why we're getting into it, and why I think our program's better. I think we can, by being involved, raise awareness to those issues and, solve them at scale for folks. So I think the poultry program we're excited about. Maybe we're going to do the same thing with pork later this year, and more exciting innovation across platforms, but also bringing more organ meats in and celebrating the whole animal and creating the healthiest food in the grocery store.
I went actually to my butcher where I get some of the meats that you all don't offer and some other things, and basically said, "Hey, can you make this ancestral blend?" And kind of showed it to them. And so they've started doing it, and it's been a huge hit for them too. So taking a little bit of the market share there, but just a small bit here in my town where I'm from.
A funny anecdote for that. At Epic, we launched a liver bar in 2015, I believe. And I think that for beef livers at the time, we were paying like 25 cents a pound. And now in some cases, the liver is more expensive than the trim meat that will go into a grinder. And there's a lot of farmers out there that'll come up to us and thank us and be like, wow, we're getting more dollars and more reward for raising these animals. But then there's a lot of other businesses that come up and are like the pet food industry are like, man, you really screwed up that part of the industry for us by raising demand and interest in those. But that's why we call them the ancestral blend, right? I mean, these would have been the cuts of the animal that would have been the first and most highly sought after cuts by our ancestors. And we lost touch with that history and that ancestral reality at a time when we're less healthy than the generation before us. And I think this is an easy way to correct that. You don't notice it, but you get all the benefits of it. So
Do you anticipate? I know at one point, and maybe this was before or post acquisition, I'm not sure, but Epic eventually started launching maybe like bone broths and tallow and some other things, ghee, maybe I don't exactly remember, but do you anticipate diversifying that way in terms of products, or is this solely focusing on the meat production?
yeah, we're focused on meat for now. I mean, we definitely were one of, if not the first to market with bone broth and animal cooking fats and super clean pork skins and even some chicken skin products. A lot of really innovative things we did at Epic. We would have been first to market with at the time collagen if we would have been allowed. We were really pushing on a lot of those concepts a little over 10 years ago, and those are really well developed categories now and that are big. And it would make sense, you would think, that with our experience in history and with what we're doing, that we could pursue those, and we could. But the reality is, in business, you still do have to focus, and we've already adopted a path and strategy that has us fairly spread thin. You don't often see, from a meat company perspective, outside of like the big 3 or 4 companies out there that control most of the industry, you don't really usually see a regional beef producer or a regional chicken producer, and that brand might be on the West Coast or the East Coast or something. You don't often see somebody that's a national brand and doing it across proteins and doing it across meal occasions, from breakfast to dinner to lunch, and then doing it, direct to consumer and in retail. So we have our hands in a lot of things, and there's enough complexity in our business and enough opportunity of that white space that we were talking about, where, if we can continue to focus on the right things, we'll make a big difference in the industry and within our mission, and be able to sell products to tallow and jerky and these other companies, and support them in doing that. But we definitely don't want to get spread so thin that that we don't end up being really good at anything.
And so much more work to be done and deeper to go in this conversation even. So for folks that maybe want to learn more, you listed a number of resources that you all provide, and they want to check out the products. Is just website, social media? Is that where you would direct people?
Yeah, Force of Nature Meats on Instagram is probably where we do are the most active, and then forceofnature.com is our website. We have a lot of information there, and we have a newsletter that I would encourage you to sign up for. Not because I sell you stuff. I mean, certainly we would love your support, but honestly, I'd rather you sign up and not buy anything and just start to tune in and educate yourself and learn more about the industry and do what's right for you. And I hope that we're a great resource that supports you in doing that. Yeah, we have our own podcast. It's called Where Hope Grows. We sometimes put some interesting stuff on there. So we really want to be an educator, and I hope folks will come check us out and engage with us in that way. And we'll see where it goes from there. Maybe they won't support us, and maybe they'll support another great producer in their area or in their region, and that's fine too. I consider that a win.
Absolutely. We'll make sure everything is linked up and easy to find. Certainly excited that you got to share some of those insights and education here today. So thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you got value from the conversation, please consider subscribing and sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It's a massive help. And if you want more content like this, including news and insights on the latest industry developments, subscribe to the Fitt Insider newsletter at insider.fit.co. And one more thing, you can learn more about our recruiting and consulting services at fit.co. That's FITT.co. I'll see you here next week.